Thank you so much for being here, everyone. I'm Safia Hussain. I'm the program coordinator at the Center of Excellence in Responsible Business, which is also known as CERB. CERB is an outreach initiative of the Pakistan Business Council, and some of the work that we do is focused on dispelling best practices in Pakistan. So we work with the private sector and we work with knowledge partners to focus on issues like decent work, ethical conduct, inclusive systems, and sustainability. Gender equality is also a big part of the work that we do. Today's webinar is called Breaking the Silence, Supporting Employees Facing Domestic Violence at Home. We believe that this is an important topic for us at CERB. And as you might know, today marks the last day of the 16 Days of Activism campaign that has been running online. So we decided to do this webinar on the final day because we wanted to talk about the work the corporate sector can do and how the companies can help their employees who are going through domestic violence at home. So one of the reasons why this topic is so important for us is because of the drastic number of cases we see in Pakistan that are related to domestic violence. A study done by the Human Rights Commission in Pakistan in 2020 stated that up to 80 to 90% of women had experienced some form of domestic violence in their lifetimes. This included women who were married, but also unmarried women as well. So, given the high number, we realized that the importance of workplaces supporting employees becomes more critical. One of the reasons for this is because sometimes workplaces are the only place where the person going through domestic violence is away from the individual who's abusing them. So, having that safe space is really important. Another reason is, when you're in a safe working environment where you're heard, where you're provided support, you automatically feel some sense of ownership, some sense of control over your life, and then you also get access to resources which you might not if you're simply at home or if you're at a workplace that doesn't support you. Also, it's important to acknowledge that the trauma and stress from domestic violence can also come into the workplace. It can show up in forms like absenteeism, or perhaps it can show up in forms like not being too engaged in the team. Sometimes, obviously, these things are stressful. So, having a safe work environment is really important. And we'll be discussing ways in which employers can support their employees in our panel today. And Sarah has also worked on this topic in the past through our Gender Diversity and Disclosure Scorecard, which we made with the IFC. For those of you who don't know about the Gender Diversity and Disclosure Scorecard, it's part of our Employer of Choice Gender Diversity Disclosure Awards, which is a project which we run with the IFC every year. And in this project, we ask corporates to submit data on gender, and we focus on disclosures on gender-related issues. So, to raise awareness about domestic violence, we've put in a question in our scorecard that includes support mechanisms that companies have. Unfortunately, only 4 out of 46 companies that participated last year had a policy or were doing some work in this area, which made us see how this was a bigger issue which needed to be spoken about and how this discussion was important for the corporate sector. So we decided the first step could be this webinar, and I am very happy to have some experts here today. So let's move on to the panel. I would like you all to introduce yourself. Perhaps we can begin with Fatima, then Rabia, and then Zahrah. It's just the pattern that's showing up on my screen, so let's start.
Great. I hope I'm audible.
You are.
Yeah, perfect. So thank you for having us here, and I think on a very, very important topic. My name is Fathema. I take care of HR for Unilever, and been now in the industry for almost 30 years. So first 15 years were on the commercial side, and now since the last 15 years in HR. So looking forward to the panel discussion.
Thank you, Fatima. Rabia, if you could go next.
My name is Rabia Khattak. I'm the head of diversity and equity and inclusion in Jazz, and been working in this sector for like more than, I think, 2 decades. So it's going to be really sort of interesting to hear the discussion on a very sensitive topic. Thank you.
Thank you, Rabia. Zahrah, would you like to go next?
Hi, Assalamu alaikum. My name is Zahrah Vayani, and I am a lawyer. I've been part of the profession in Pakistan for 14 years. I'm running my own law firm for the past 4, which is known as Zahrah S. Vayani Associates. We deal with a lot of domestic violence and a lot of harassment in the workplace and many other, of course, areas of law. So maybe it'll be interesting to give a legal perspective to the whole discussion today. So lovely to be here, and thank you for having me.
Thank you for being a part of this discussion. I'm genuinely so glad that all three of you could make it today. Fatma, Zara, my first question would be for you. I wanted to ask, what do you think are what are some of the legal steps that individuals can take? Like you mentioned, you deal with a lot of domestic violence cases. So, what are some of the steps that individuals can take, and what does the law say about domestic violence?
So in 2012, Sindh was one of the first provinces to have a domestic violence law which had come in, and the steps are very simple, and they were simplified so that anybody can go and complain against domestic violence or anyone who's been a victim. Now, the first step would be to register a complaint at the police station which is closest to your house address. Now, this domestic violence complaint can be against anyone from your father to your brother to your husband, your in-laws, depending on even your neighbor, depending on who fits under the relevant description of being within the realm of domestic violence. Now, once you go and you mean the victim files a complaint with the nearby police station, then the police is supposed to investigate on the same. You provide all your evidences. Now, a lot of domestic abuse victims don't take pictures of their bruises. They always feel, because at that time they're so traumatized, they're going through so much that they don't realize what needs to be shown to the police as evidence of the same. So the evidence that is collected or should be collected is pictures of the bruises, any videos, even abusive voice notes, because domestic violence is not only physical. The Act 2013, and then of course there are similar acts have followed in different provinces as well. It includes financial abuse, it includes emotional abuse, and of course verbal and physical, and at the end sexual abuse. So whatever abuse the victim is going through, the victim has a right to somehow. I know emotional abuse is hard to find evidence for, but either way, any sort of messages or pictures or emails, etc., which can indicate abusive behavior, and then of course which can result in emotional abuse, can also be registered with the police station. The steps after that would then be the investigation takes place. The investigating officer or the IO will follow the complaint through. If there are sections which are you sort of used from the Act, if the abuse and the evidence adds up, then it is taken to court, and a private complaint, etc., is then filed thereafter.
Okay, thank you for going into this in detail. I was wondering if you could guide us about a few public or free resources that might be available for people trying to file a complaint.
So we have the Legal Aid Society. They're doing a great job. You can find a lot of literature and material on their website. Our firm website also has a lot of literature, just a step-by-step sort of a way of how one can file, a victim of abuse can file a complaint. Apart from that, it's literally the Domestic Violence Act 2013 for Sindh, 2015 for Khyber Pakhtunkhwa, and then thereafter in Balochistan there was I believe there's an 18 Act. So I mean, all of those are available online, and they're very simple. And as I said, that there is a step-by-step process. If you just there are lots of resources online. Also, just one more thing that I'd like to add in is there are a lot of panagas or shelters where people really don't know about them, and maybe we could share them later, or when you as you wish, because that is when a victim of abuse sometimes needs to leave their house. They cannot be in that same area. The space is not safe for them, and for that they need to be taken to panagas, or they need to be taken to certain shelters where they will be helped. Another way, of course, would be to go to another family member, or if you're married, to your parents' house, etc. But many don't have that luxury, and in that case, then it needs to be one of the list that maybe I can provide for you, and we can take it from there.
That would be helpful. Thank you so much, Zara. My next question is to Fatma. Since we were talking about provisions, I wanted to ask what are some of the resources or support systems that Unilever has in place for employees who might be facing domestic violence? Maybe you could tell us a little bit about what your policy perhaps looks like as well.
Thank you for that. And just before I answer your question, it's interesting when we launched our domestic violence policy, that was in 2020. And what was the trigger at that time was COVID, because people were living in confined spaces. And what we saw globally was that there was an uptick of domestic violence at that time because of the fact that there was proximity, there was frustration, and there was a sense of helplessness, which also got manifested through heightened domestic violence. When we started thinking about this policy and when we consulted the law, just like Zara mentioned, we realized that Pakistan actually has a law in every province of the country. And hence there was support coming in also from law if we were to come up with a policy. I'll talk briefly about what our policy covers. I think just to highlight, like Zara mentioned, I think the first thing that you want to do, if God forbid you are in abusive relationship, is to make sure that there's physical separation. So our policy revolves a lot around making sure that what kind of support can we give to our employees. By the way, it's a gender neutral policy, so it applies to men and women, and not only to just our employees, but also to our contractual employees and also to house members in case they are living in any Unilever estate like we have in Rainier Khan. So what we do is the first thing is that we offer, the individual to move out of the premises, and we give them a free stay for 15 days if we were to put them up in a hotel or in one of our guest houses, etc. And the cost of that is completely borne by the company. Many times people also want to move out of the city because they may not be in the same city as their maternal home or paternal home. So we take care of that cost and the movement out of that city. From an emotional support perspective, we do have a EAP line where you can dial up to trained psychiatrists and psychologists. But besides that, we also take care of any counseling which may be required by the individuals. Many a times we've noticed that there could be medical help that is required, and that's another support which is provided to our people. They can work out of any other location for some time if they don't want to be in that city. And along with that, we also give them 10 days of paid leaves if they just want to switch off and move away from the situation. So the first attempt is to get them out of the location and provide whatever support that we can. The second is to help them recover mentally through all the counseling services that we have. And third, and the most important thing is to make sure that they don't have to worry about work or the impact of that, and that's the support is there. What we don't take care of is any litigation or legal support which may be required, because that's very much left to the individual themselves to consider if they really want to pursue that route. And the policy is very widely cascaded. It is known to people, and hence it is ease of access for everyone.
Okay. So Fatma, one of my questions in the in the second one that I was planning to ask you was about how do you dispel these policies? Like how are you making sure that employees are aware of these? So since you mentioned that they're, everybody's informed and prior to prior when they join or something. So if you could just tell us how that's done and what does the HR do to ensure that everybody's aware of these policies?
Yeah. So first and foremost, policies like these are very widely cascaded. When people not only join the company, but we've got very regular lean-in circles which we run for women by the senior leaders in the organization, and we openly talk about these policies. There's also a one-stop solution for all policies that we have. That's there as well. Line managers are taken into the loop so that they know what support is available for people. But I tell you, what is the biggest thing which has helped us so far in, bringing to surface any issues which require help is basically through friends. And, when there is knowledge of these policies within the organization, it is usually friends of friends who reach out to us and say that, look, someone is going through a challenge. They've reached out to us, how can we help? Because you usually tend to confide, at a friend at work. So that helps us tremendously, building a lot of communication. The other thing, line managers, because they've got high amount of talent intimacy with their teams. So the minute they come up with a possible case, which is of domestic violence, they reach out to the HR teams. And that's where very confidentially we reach out with support.
Okay. Thanks for highlighting the entire process. And I was not surprised to hear that the policy came about during COVID because it is a proper research fact that during times of crises like COVID, the floods in 2022, domestic violence did increase. So makes a lot of sense why Unilever decided to bring this policy back then. My next question is to Rabia. Rabia, how did Jazz decide to create its policy, and what are some of the measures that the company takes to promote a safe and supportive environment?
No, thank you. So yeah, I think keeping in view what Unilever has, or Fatma has mentioned, I think this is a requirement that sort of came about over the years. Our policy formulation, again, was a process that I feel like everybody should know about it because it's something that others can also replicate. We had our legal team on board, we had our compliance team on board, and we also had our P&O. So we all sort of sat down together. We put this policy together so that we could ensure that every aspect and every angle is covered. Now, again, I think just like Unilever mentioned that, Fatma mentioned that there are certain provisions that are there and are required. I think this is something that we cannot neglect, that there is or could be it there will be like the policy sort of not only covers it covers different aspects: emotional abuse, psychological abuse. It also covers stalking, cyber harassment. So again, over here, these are things that have been developing over the years, and this is something that we felt was important for to ensure that the employee gives their best to their job and make sure that there is full support for them. So now, to create a safe and supportive environment, what I would suggest an organization can implement, there are several key measures. I think, like again, Fatma mentioned the resource. Sorry, not Fatma, even Zahrah mentioned that, there's support resources, like legal aid is there. If an organization can provide access to even information, which is confidential counseling, support service and hotlines. These could include partnerships with local domestic violence organizations so that the employee has access to these resources so that it can take a fair decision on what are the next steps. Of course, our own policy is there, which does help out because it gives you the flexible work arrangement. If required, you need to be moved to another location. That's something that can be reviewed. Again, there is a special leave that has, other than the leave that you already have, that is usually catered for. And then, of course, their protection as well. So again, all these aspects, most companies could look at as creating certain measures to provide a safe and supportive environment for their employees.
Thank you, Rabia. I see both Unilever and Jazz, your policies are focused on various aspects and how best the company can support their employees. Zahrah, what do you think? What are some of the steps that companies can take to encourage more women to speak out, and some of the provisions that companies who don't have a policy yet can apply to their HR policies?
So I think it's really nice to hear both from Rabia and Fatima that that there are policies in place and the policies are quite extensive, which is honestly it's great to hear because one always wonders how the organizations from that aspect how they are taking these into consideration. Another thing that can be added in is when we talk about safe spaces. I think we've already Fatma also mentioned some sort of counseling, and so did Rabia. So yeah, I think the main points that one would want to address in organization and explain to them would be to have a counseling, which would of course be very confidential because women to stand up, or even men. I mean, it can be either gender or a trans person, for them to stand and voice their concerns of domestic abuse or violence takes a lot of strength. And for that, one needs to look at the human aspect. Counseling is something which will help them. As we said, we've spoken about that. Apart from that, safe spaces, removal from, just an organization to help them say that, we might not provide funding, but a directory, as Rabia had mentioned, that you can address your concerns here. These people will be able to help you, or maybe a small fund, which would say that, okay, if the Legal Aid Society can help you for free, but if they can't, we can provide you with a stipend in which you can go and file somewhere. It might not be a lot, or it might be deductible from your salary over a period of time, because there are lots of women who actually cannot, who don't have the funds immediately. So that is something that I've also seen, that even if they want to file, they don't have the resources. Even men sometimes. So those are the kind of things that one needs to consider. Apart from that, just the policies in itself, for a organization to be, I mean, if you I know Rabia spoke about cyber harassment and all of those, which I know it don't really come under domestic abuse, but we always sort of promote or tell organizations and promote the fact that they should have harassment policies. They should have online, which would also include cyber harassment, and so on, because now tribunals are made. So if we sort of diversify from the topic a little bit, we do have a lot more for at which addresses people's concerns, and sometimes it's not abuse at the workplace, but it is harassment at the workplace, and that also needs to be addressed, maybe at a different in a different webinar. But it is very, very relevant, and it is very much a real thing. But apart from that, yes, I think as far as organizational policies are concerned, it's just a safe space, because there's a fine line between saying I can help you at home and how we can help you the organization can help you at work. And sometimes the family members also get involved, saying, why are you working here? Because they're trying to interfere in your personal life, etc. So one has to, and I'm sure Ravi and Fatma will can address this better, but I know for a fact that there are quite a few, there's a line that you can't cross, and there are quite a few cases that have come up saying that they've just told the woman especially not to work, because they've said aapko wahan buri baatein sunne ko mil rahi hai, or like you're being taught something which should not be, which is not correct or immoral or whatever it may be. So that's the kind of outlook, unfortunately, our society has. So I think that should answer your query.
Thank you, Zara. It does answer my query. And I was just thinking, maybe just thinking out loud, perhaps, how policies are, ongoing, iterative hoti hain thodi si. So you see that, newer topics come in and then you keep adding those. So like Jazz's policy covers cyber stalking. Perhaps that doesn't come under domestic abuse, but it could be a part of domestic violence as well. So having like a full-fledged policy that covers things in detail, I think is really important. Fatima, I come back to you. You mentioned in your previous answer how your HR teams or your managers are trained to deal with these situations. So, what sort of training do they undergo, and how is confidentiality handled when, for example, a friend comes to you to report a case? So, how does your organization look into that?
Yeah, I think that's a very good question, because if you ask me honestly, the numbers that we get is not fairly representative of probably the challenges that we have in the society. So I think there's still a bit of work to be done in that area. What we do have is a program of mental health champions, whereby our own employees are trained on the early signs of detecting mental well-being challenges, right? And that really helps, because they can tell if an individual is feeling anxiety or is going through depression, or maybe a bit withdrawn in terms of their presence at work, etc. So it's a training that our people can sign up for. It is done through the global teams, and that basically allows them to become a bit more open to understanding if anyone in their teams or in their circles is going through any mental well-being challenges. And we've got around 40 mental health champions trained within the organization. Many of these people are, kind of, we talk about them very openly, so that if anyone is even feeling mentally, challenged in any way, they can reach out to them as comfort spots to go and discuss anything. So I think that's one thing which was done differently. Because sadly, in the case of domestic violence, people don't reach out to you, and you have to be perhaps the first one to make that conversation in terms of, I see something's not right, or you're very distracted, or you're very down, what is happening. So I think the presence of these mental health champions is something which has really helped us. But confidentiality is actually the key to this, because if, God forbid, anything like this does become known by a wider circle, then the organization really loses its approach on the whole thing. So what we typically do is that if any case is reported of domestic violence, it is managed with utmost discretion, and just amongst maybe one or two people, so that nobody, sometimes the line manager also does not know about it. And it's between HR and the approvals for, where we need to put them up, any kind of, cost that we need to incur is done strictly at my level. So hence, that confidentiality gives people more comfort to talk about.
I think because of the stigma around domestic violence, it's very hard for victims to open up in the first place. So having this confidentiality layer to the whole thing, I think makes it a lot easier for people to speak out and come ask for help. Rabia, what do you think about confidentiality? How does Jazz ensure this when they're, when they're handling cases? And also, another question for you is, what are some of the best ways you think other organizations can use these sort of policies and implement them? And how do you ensure confidentiality basically?
Okay, I think confidentiality, that's a very what we've done at Jazz is we've restricted the amount of people. I think Fatma already mentioned that she's one of the persons who is who ensures that confidentiality aspect. For us, it's slightly different from Unilever. How it's different is we have diversity, equity, and inclusion not embedded in the P&O section. P&O we have it embedded in a separate entity with compliance. So again, over here, what does this mean? This means that diversity, equity, and inclusion is part of our people pillar, our business, and our community. Again, over here, further dwelling down into it, what does it mean is that, for example, so we are sort of integrated completely within the organization. So let's assume X person has an issue, is a victim of domestic violence. That person will go to the line manager, and if they feel comfortable, otherwise they have that they can always bring it to the DNI personnel. But then again, we have sort of restricted the information to maximum one or two people, and if required, and only with their permission, it moves forward. We also have a very strong speak up system, where if there is such an issue that comes up, be it harassment at the workplace, be it domestic violence, it is recorded. Again, it is brought to the right entity, but that is a bigger entity that I'm talking about. That's more at harassment at the workplace. Domestic violence has a smaller audience, while the harassment at the workplace goes through our compliance and our investigations if required. And then, of course, it is taken forward further as well. So regarding your question, sorry, could you repeat your second question?
Yeah, so my second question was, how do you inform employees of these resources that exist? And you've already covered the confidentiality part, so I think we're good on that.
Okay. So one of the, I think, again, as was mentioned, I really found it interesting, this mental health champions that have come in as an idea at that Unilever has taken. I'd love to get more information on that. But we right now have been providing trainings on, we generally do trainings of all staff on how to report on harassment at the workplace, on a policy, on other aspects, making sure it's part of our DNI strategy awareness sessions, so that if there is anything that needs to be brought in, they all are well aware of where and how to do this. So that's something we're looking at, making sure that employees who are who are experiencing domestic violence, they have to feel safe and supported and not judged. So very often in our trainings on D&I, we do ensure that there are no biasness, there is no prejudices, that all those aspects, people putting people in boxes, those aspects are sort of covered, and we have a psychologically safe place where we want to work on. So this is like a sort of a training that we do on a regular basis to make sure everybody is comfortable in reporting if required. So that's some of the aspects that we sort of cover.
Okay, so I'm happy to see that there's some sensitization happening at the same time as well. Because when we talk about these things, we need to realize how important sensitization is and the role that it plays. It's also one of the ways through which stigma perhaps can lessen, and these conversations become more normal and more easy to have. So I think it's a good step that Jazz is taking and making sure that you're training your staff, you're also informing them to not have any biases, because of course that allows people to speak out more. Zara, so I would just ask, what are some, as a closing remark, what's some advice that you would like to give to companies? What are some legal ways that they can incorporate into their policies? What do you think?
So the one thing I was thinking whilst Fatma and Rabia were speaking, and again, they gave such relevant, I've said this before, but I'm really glad that most of the aspects that, I even wanted to address have already been addressed in their respective policies and the talk. But so one thing is awareness. I also feel that sometimes employees know of a certain, a certain manual which may exist, or a certain program which may exist for their safety, etc., or regarding harassment of the workplace or domestic violence or anything else that they face, but they don't really know much more about it. So I mean, I'm sure there are sessions which are held regarding those, but that would be one thing that I would maybe just say, that which hasn't been maybe spoken about, that they need to be aware of their rights, and from a legal perspective, and then from an organizational perspective. So we usually do, like, for example, talks in different organizations, so that on a very personal level, a lot of the employees, are told about instances which may happen, are told that if, for example, they are facing XYZ, how they can address the same from a legal perspective, and then at home, and thereafter from the organizational perspective. So I also feel that awareness is something which is really important, and as the organize, and they should not feel scared to approach someone in the organization, whoever the contact person is, because that is something that can pose to be a problem for them. But apart from that, I think my closing remark would just be that I'm glad that these organizations are doing so well in promoting the victims of abuse and helping them in their own manner. But as long as they're aware that these organizations are helping them, and that they have a place to turn to, they have a safe place to go to, and someone to talk to, I think that is very relevant and very important, and that will hopefully help reducing the amount of victims, not because they've been, you can't stop those who are going through it, but those who continue suffering. And I think that is very important, because those who continue suffering should be should know that there's a way out, and I think that is should be provided.
Thank you, Zara. That was really well put and well thought. Fatma, my next question, or perhaps like just asking you to give your closing remarks, and what, if there are any recommendations or advice that you have for companies who are just beginning to think on these topics. What do you think, as as a person from Unilever, or an HR director, what do you have to say?
Thanks. I think when you're putting together policies like that, you feel as an organization you're biting more than you can chew, and should these be commitments that organizations should make? And these are the kind of thoughts which go through people's mind. My advice to everyone on the call is that this is something which has very little investment, but goes a very long way in not only creating the right environment, for the individuals, but also in really helping build those relationships and connections with your people which go a long way. I mean, I recall some of the cases of domestic violence which came to me until today when I meet those people, even if they walk by in the corridors, there's just a gentle smile and a connection which is so much deeper than anything else. Because we feel that the organization has done something which was very different. And at that point in time, there was no price that they could have put on a policy of this sort. So rather than, kind of resisting it in terms of, oh my God, what kind of a commitment will this take, etc., I would, genuinely request everyone on the call to embrace it as something that we should do as progressive organizations. And when we do something like this, it's extremely important that your top leaders or your CEOs, etc., they are completely sold on this proposition. Because if they are not, then it becomes like a poster child campaign, but it's not really getting the right advocacy, it's not getting the right support, it's not getting the right thought. So kind of build that momentum from the top, and then be very, very open in its communication, and just take it as something that we need to do for our communities, because unfortunately our ecosystem outside the offices or outside our workplaces is not that well built, right? We're not in one of the developed countries where the system already exists, thanks to external factors. So we have to create these safe zones within our own offices, within our own ecosystems. And if any organization can do that, trust me, the dividend that it gets in terms of being an employer that cares goes a very, very long way. And it's a very good feeling to know that you have even helped one or two people through this difficult moment of their life.
Thank you, Fatma, for that. I definitely feel that having such policies are also reflective of the company culture. It shows that a company genuinely cares for their employees and their well-being. So, yes, I'm hoping that all the other companies listening today will focus and start working on having these policies. Rabia, what advice would you give to companies, and just some closing remarks from your end?
I mean, I would just agree with what Fatma and Zara have said. It's just amazing. But I want to thank you all, okay, for bringing us all together. Because touching this, I know it's the 16 days of activism, all that, but touching this important topic, which is not easy for any company to talk about. So I would suggest this is excellent that you have put us all together on one stage. But I think what's important is that I feel still that many companies will still shy away, being not knowing exactly how it actually helps out people. And shy because it's like they may not want to touch a topic which could get very sensitive, as mentioned by Zara as well, and as mentioned by Fatma. These are things that hurt. So again, it's a suggestion, but if we do have companies, and BBC sort of highlights them and says, sort of that these are some good case studies for us to follow. Fatma in Unilever has done it this way, Rabia in Jazz has done it this way, and Bazara thinks this might be another way. Again, over here, it would be great resource for others shying away to know who to reach out to for some advice if required, and happy to help out the society, and at large. So that's my thing, two bits worth. Thank you.
Thank you, Rabia. And one of the reasons for this webinar was bringing together the few companies that are doing something in this area, and then also having some legal perspective on what can be done. Because, of course, this is an important topic for us, and we've been having some sort of conversation through our scorecard, but of course, that was limited. So we wanted to take a different approach this time, involve some companies, and get some of the conversation started. Of course, this is a starting point. Hopefully, we'll see more conversations on this topic in the future. And I'm sure Fatma, Rabia, Zara are all available to help out for the companies that are here watching this webinar. Um, I think we can now also open the floor to any questions if the audience has any. And otherwise, we can end the webinar here. But I would like to see if there are any questions. So, okay, somebody's raised their hand. Um, Hi, Usma. You can ask your question now. If you want, you can use the chat box to ask your questions, if that's easier. Uzma, you're on mute, so we can't hear you right now.
I'm writing the question.
Okay, sure. Any other attendees who have questions, you can also ask them in the chat box. We'll be happy to answer them. Okay, Uzma's question is, can you guys do an effort in your organization to create awareness about eliminating domestic violence? I think already your conversation might be happening if those policies exist, but I'd let Fatma and Rabia take the lead on this question because they are the companies who have those policies in the first place.
Rabia, you want to go first?
Yeah, it's an interesting question, Uzma. Eliminating domestic violence. Awareness helps, of course, but I really hope we can eliminate it completely from our society, first of all. If we're able to do that, then I'm sure we can do that for our employees as well. That's our target, because we have zero tolerance to do domestic violence. So again, that's what we want to achieve. And I hope we can, but it's like saying we want to eliminate poverty from Pakistan. But it's not an easy target.
No. My question is that you have discussed your policies and everything, which is when the something is occur with someone. Okay, if someone is some of your employees are a victim of the domestic violence, you have a whole system to help them out. But is there any way that organizations can help to create the awareness that how to eliminate them, this crime within your households or within your systems? My question is that.
Thank you, Usma. It's a bit clearer. Usma, the thing is, yes, over here, awareness helps. But does it completely eliminate? Awareness, we will talk about how it's wrong, how we have no zero tolerance for it. If we find somebody's done it, it's wrong, and etc. Or if somebody has been abused, we have to facilitate them. But then the question over here again is that awareness helps. That's all I can say.
So,
Fatma, you might want to add more.
Uzma, thanks for the question. I wish we could eliminate it, yeah. But I think what we can do is drive accountability. And the fact that, the law is there, and like Zahrah also spoke, that more people need to reference to the law. More people need to raise their voice, and that's where accountability then gets driven. I'll give you a small example. Knowing that we have a policy on domestic violence, we have sometimes spouses reaching out to us directly, saying that you have someone working in your organization. You're a caring organization. You have this policy, but guess what? You have someone in your organization who is not treating their spouse well. So then that leaves a bit to us in terms of, and it's a very, very difficult area to kind of go by, but something that again comes back to us in terms of now how do we drive accountability. So it becomes very difficult for organizations to drive accountability on the person who is doing domestic violence. That's where I think the law comes in. But if you ask me honestly, when you create this kind of awareness, when you talk about things openly, and we do that in all our town halls, in our awareness days, etc., the intent is to really kind of bring alive that that person from within to say what we should be doing, what we should not be doing. And it is also part of our company values and business principles. So we spelt it out in that as well, so that tomorrow, we make people more and more aware that this is something which goes against the company's ways of working and value system. But the best way to do it, if you ask me, would be to raise accountability, to perhaps use the law to do that. Zahrah, I think you probably have some thoughts on this.
Thank you for your question, Isma. So I think that when you say how can you make someone accountable, it is as both Rabia and Fatma have said, it's very hard. But what one can do is, from an organizational perspective, is that, as we said, have a list of what steps to do next. So, for example, someone has come and approached the organization or the heads and said that they're going through something, they're a victim of abuse of any sort. Then after counseling and after the help the organization can give, they can then give them what to do, next steps, guidance as in which lawyer to take to take on, or, as I said, guide them to a pro bono society like the Legal Aid Society, depending on their finances, and that is how they can. I wouldn't really call it accountability, but that is something that the organization can do. It's within their realm. But apart from that, I don't think they can go beyond that fine line that I spoke about earlier, because there is that fine line, and they can only do that much. So I think it would be helpful to have the next steps. It would be helpful to have maybe a list of resources which are available or are handy, or in some part of the office, etc., where they can, or they're told that once they come and make a complaint about what they're going through. So I think that would be something that is easily done, and would also be helpful and beneficial for the victim.
Thank you.
Thank you, Isma, for your question. I think we have another question from Ijaz Hussain. If you can unmute yourself and ask your question, or you can use the chat box, whichever is easy.
मैम मेरा क्वेश्चन ये है कि जब ऑर्गेनाइजेशन का सीईओ खुद ही डोमेस्टिक वायलेंस करे तो ऐसी सिचुएशन में क्या करना चाहिए?
Zahrah, would you like to take this part?
अगर एक ऑर्गेनाइजेशन का सीईओ डोमेस्टिक वायलेंस में मुलविस है, तो सबसे पहली बात तो ये है कि वो उनकी जो विक्टिम जो भी हैं, अगर सीईओ खातून है तो उनके शौहर होंगे, या फिर अगर इफ इट्स मैन देन उनकी जो बीवी होंगी, वो जाके अपनी कंप्लेंट फाइल कर सकती हैं. इफ उनकी जो स्पाउस है या जो विक्टिम ऑफ द अब्यूज हैं, वो आके अगर ऑर्गेनाइजेशन में अगर बात भी करेंगे, दे विल हैव टू कम विद अ लॉट ऑफ एविडेंस, एंड उसके बाद भी ऑर्गेनाइजेशनल पॉलिसीज विल डिपेंड कि उनके साथ कैसे डील किया जाएगा. नाउ आई थिंक इट्स बेटर दैट अगर ऐसा कोई सिनारियो सामने आए, तो वो खुद जाके पुलिस स्टेशन कंप्लेंट रजिस्टर करें, जो मैंने पहले दफ़ा बताया था, और उन स्टेप्स को फॉलो करें. Because that's something which, again, even if it's highlighted in the organization, I'm sure the organization के जो बाकी heads हैं, वो कुछ steps ले सकते हैं उनके खिलाफ, but as a no tolerance policy etc. लेकिन overall उससे victim को कोई help नहीं होगी, because even if कोई अगर abuse करता है, if someone who's a perpetrator, तो उनको अगर organization से निकाल भी दिया जाए, that won't make him stop. That won't make him stop or her stop being an abuser. तो बेहतर ये है कि उनके खिलाफ लीगल रेमेडी इस्तेमाल की जाए और पुलिस को इन्फॉर्म किया जाए, बिकॉज उस तरीके से एटलीस्ट विक्टिम को उनकी जस्टिस तो मिलेगा, एंड वो अपने हक के लिए लड़ सकती हैं उस तरीके से. आई होप दैट.
अच्छा मैडम, गवर्नमेंट की तरफ से कोई ऐसा कोई प्रोटेक्शन यूनिट है?
एक तो लॉ है जो प्रोविंशियल लॉ होता है, क्योंकि सिंध में क्योंकि हम सिंध की प्रोविंस में होते हैं, तो प्रोविंशियल गवर्नमेंट की तरफ से एक जो लॉ प्रोमलगेट हुआ है 2013 का, मैंने जो बताया था. उसके अलावा एवरी और मोस्ट police stations now and I speak of Sindh, but in Punjab as well as Balochistan and KPK, they have women and children sections. तो खवातीन के लिए और बच्चों के लिए अलग से पुलिस स्टेशन में सेक्शन है अब बच्चों के लिए क्योंकि child abuse etc and those who are victims of that, but also women who have been who are the victims of any type of abuse etc. तो उस तरीके से that is the governmental step that has been taken कि क्योंकि पहले था कि especially for women, I know कि men के लिए भी है of course, लेकिन खवातीन के लिए बहुत मुश्किल था पुलिस स्टेशन जाना, अपनी कंप्लेंट रजिस्टर करनी. उनको लगता था कि मैं एक मेल पुलिस ऑफिसर को कैसे समझा सकूं कि मेरे साथ क्या हुआ है. तो उस तरीके से उसके लिए हमारे पास हम एक किस्म का प्रोविंशियल गवर्नमेंट ने एक हल निकाला है to support the victims.
Thank you.
Thank you, Zahrah. Ijaz, I think आपका question अच्छे से answer हो गया. एक और question आया है in the Q&A box from Nazish. How do you convince the bosses who think this is not a workplace issue? I think Rabia and Fatma will be best fit to answer this one. So what do you think? What should be done?
Well, if you can't convince the bosses, then at least create a group of people who can get through them. So if the top is not convinced, how do you create a kind of a compelling audience जो उनको prevail करे? And I have seen many times. I remember that when we were talking about menstrual policy, for example, a lot of people turned around and said, "Ke क्या जरूरी है? There are sick leaves in the organization. Why do you need to call these out as special leaves?" And I remember at that time we said that, again, this is one of those areas that the mental stigmas that we need to break for people to say it and talk about it. And hence, we created a group of women who said, look, this is something that we want, because otherwise people will just say we take too many sick leaves. Yeah. And we convinced the top management in terms of why something like this should be there. So wherever you feel that you're facing resistance in terms of converting one person because they don't find the need for something like this, you need to create a bit of a group of people who can convince, and then pull out a lot of examples from different organizations, which are doing that. And what, like someone mentioned, it says a lot about their culture. Okay, what benefits can come to the organization as a result of something like this. So इसको approach करने का तरीका फर्क हो सकता है to convince, and then people do get convinced.
Thank you, Fatma. Rabia, would you like to add something?
No, I think Fatma has been spot on. I mean, it's all about lobbying, so I don't think I want to add anything else.
Okay. I think there are two questions in the chat box as well. So I think we can consider these the last two questions before we wrap up. एक ज़ियाउल्लाह खान की तरफ से है, which is how you build confidence in your workforce to share such personal information at workplace. Usually, individuals are reluctant to share such. What are strategies to bring people closer and open to speaking up?
I can take this one, Fatma, or you want to do it? Go ahead. All right. No, I think यहाँ पे it's a matter of a culture, and it's a matter of like I mentioned, we have a very strong speak up. It can be anonymous, and it can also be a person can share their name. And then, of course, there's the whole process that goes behind it. So there's faith in the system and the system to work. In this case of domestic violence as well, there's faith in the people and the way that the individual is viewed by the organization, and then the trust that they have in that person to be able to take it forward. So it's if, for example, let's assume you have to be have to share your confidential information with a person who's extremely rude, doesn't have the respect, then nobody will share. That is your go-to person. So it has to be somebody who is valued by the organization where the individual has given some results.
Thank you, Rabia. Okay, so I got a question from Sarah. This is the last question that we'll take. It says, why don't we have a male speaker on this panel? I've hardly ever heard of a woman abusing a man at home or in workplaces. I want a man on the panel to feel the shame. Sarah, I think I would like to answer this one because I came up with the idea of this panel and this conversation. So the idea was not to shame any one particular person on कि क्यों issue होता है. Everyone who is a part, who is violent or abusive should feel shame for their actions, yes, but हम एक panel पे किसी male speaker को बुला के we can't shame them because that's not the point. We're trying to be more inclusive as organizations by having conversations like these. And you are right, we can have a male champion perhaps next time on our webinars too. But this is just a starting point, like I said. We want to make this conversation more normal so that the stigma attached to domestic violence goes away. So this is just a starting point. And I think we need to work on moving away from, our own conceptions के सारे मर्द ऐसे करते होंगे या सारी औरतें ऐसे करती होंगी. We need to think in more progressive terms because we live in a society where things are changing and हमें भी उसके हिसाब से अपने आप को change करना है. So I think that will be my answer to you. But thank you so much for still pointing this out. And thank you to all the speakers who are here. Thank you for your time and the attendees for taking out time and for asking questions that were thought-provoking and kept us thinking.
Thank you for having us.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Take care, everyone. Goodbye.